All right, let's go. Let's try this again. This has been a disaster. I had a whole video filmed for this, for the review of this book, and I realized that my opinions have changed over the past 48 hours. So I am doing this again, but I cannot get my thoughts in order to talk about this. So I'm going to talk about all things For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, including For Whom the Bell Tolls, the movie adaptation. Make sure that this is on. My mic is on. With Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman, because I watched that as well. So, before I get into talking about the book, I think I need to give some background on the Spanish Civil War, which I've done a crash course on trying to understand all of this due to the book, because the book itself, For Whom the Bell Tolls, is set during the Spanish Civil War. All right, so let's talk about this real quick. The Spanish Civil War began in 1936, and then it lasted until 1939. Okay, so the background of this is, in 1931, there was the Spanish Republic, right? And the king of Spain, King Alfonso XIII, was deposed. He abdicated the throne and he fled from the country. So you have this Spanish Republic, which is an alliance. I think its official name is known as the Popular Front, at least from what I can tell. So the Popular Front was an alliance of communist, socialist, liberals, progressives, anarchists, and they had kind of a secular ideology. So one of the things you have to understand about Spain was kind of immune to the Protestant Reformation, so it had a very heavy Catholic presence. All right, so you had the monarch and the church. They were very closely interconnected with one another. As a result of the Popular Front taking over, we had what was known as the Red Terror, which took place from 1931 to the end of the Civil War, which began in 1936. There were arson attacks on churches, monasteries, Catholic schools, convents, tens of thousands of political dissidents, or political rivals, I guess is what you'd call them, people that were not supportive of the Popular Front, of the Second Spanish Republic. They were executed, killed. Okay, this included over 6,000 Catholic priests were put to death. So this was ugly. This was really violent and ugly. In 1936, there was a coup staged by the nationalist forces. The nationalists, these were people that were fascist, people that were loyal to the Catholic Church, people that were loyal to the Spanish monarch and the Spanish monarchy. So both on the left and on the right, you kind of had a hodgepodge of people that all grouped together, but they're fighting for various reasons. Okay, not everybody that fought for the national government was, or for the Nationalist Party, were fascist. It was a portion of them. And not everybody on the left that was part of the Second Spanish Republic were communist. Okay? There was all kinds of different people on both sides. And that's why this whole thing is very muddy and very hard to sort through. Simply boiling it down to communist versus fascist, which is, I think, the way that this thing is portrayed, is not exactly fair. Now, it is true that the Soviet Union backed the Republicans, okay, so the Spanish Popular Front government, and that fascist Germany and fascist Italy, the Axis powers, backed General Franco, and his nationalist forces. That's a fact. Now, how does Ernest Hemingway come into all this? So Ernest Hemingway he spent some time in Spain. When he was in World War One, he served as an ambulance driver. He was wounded and ended up spending time in Spain as a result of his shrapnel injuries. And he visited Spain quite often. And I think he had a connection with the country, and that precipitates his involvement in politicizing or stumping for and making propaganda speeches on behalf of the Republican government. In fact, in 1937, he backed the film, which is called The Spanish Earth. He funded it. It was a pro-Republican propaganda film. This film was very widely shown. In fact, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this movie was screened to him at the White House. It had a narration which was done by Orson Welles. In fact, I saw a clip of Orson Welles saying that he actually got into a fist fight with Ernest Hemingway while he was doing the narration for this movie. They had the movie playing. He's reading Hemingway's script, and he kind of made fun of it. And Hemingway got mad and called him a word which I can't repeat here, which is a bundle of sticks. All right, called him an F-A-G-G. I'm not going to go into all that. Okay, and then Orson Welles and him proceeded to take swings at each other, and they became lifelong friends as a result. But this film, Spanish Earth, is a propaganda film. It depicts it downplays kind of the internal divisions within the Popular Front and the Republican forces. It kind of portrays the Spanish Civil War as simply black versus white, good versus evil, that this democratically elected government is fighting against fascism. And he gave a speech, Hemingway gave a speech at Carnegie Hall in June of 1937, which is titled "Fascism is a Lie." And if you want to read this speech, you can. I read it. It's interesting. But then we go through history, we realize at the time, if we were living on the earth, some of us were, maybe you were at the time, you'd be really old at this point, like really old. But when he publishes this book in 1940, the World War II has started, all right? It began. 1939, World War II begins in Europe. But the Spanish Civil War had already concluded. So this book that he publishes, Franco's forces won. And our protagonist of the novel, Robert Jordan, who Ernest Hemingway says he based upon with the intent that he wanted Gary Cooper to play this character, because he was thinking about a movie when he wrote the book, evidently. I don't know. He had Gary Cooper in mind. That Robert Jordan, no, not the guy that wrote The Wheel of Time, okay? I know. Say Robert Jordan, you think, Wheel of Time. No, this is not that Robert Jordan. This Robert Jordan, like I said, college professor from Montana on sabbatical, Spanish Civil War breaks out, and he joins with these Republican fighters. All right? Now, there was a brigade of Americans that went over to join in the conflict, mostly consisting of communists. It was called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. It consisted of, it was integrated. It had women fighters, African Americans, dudes. This conflict is really complicated because you actually had people from Ireland that were fighting on the side of Franco, like Irish Catholics. Very weird. Kind of reminds me almost of what's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now. All right, another proxy war. Okay, we've got a proxy war currently going on between NATO and Russia, right? This was a proxy war between the Soviet Union and the Axis powers. Now, getting into the novel itself, now that I've got all that background laid out, let's just talk about it. At the core of this novel, okay, where does it get its title? It comes from a John Donne's work, where he says, and this is the epigraph at the beginning of the novel, Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. John Donne. The gist of this quote is that mankind is interconnected, that nobody's death is in isolation. I think this is especially true in a civil war. In fact, in the novel by Hemingway, many callbacks are made to the American Civil War. The character of Robert Jordan, who joins with these guerrilla fighters, his whole mission is to blow a bridge. He's given these orders by a Soviet general, and he joins with this group of guerrillas, these partisans. The first person he meets is Anselmo, who is an ex-Catholic. He's an old man. Probably my favorite character in the book because he struggles with the thought of killing people, but Robert Jordan joins up. Anselmo takes him to meet this group of partisan fighters. It consists of Pablo and his wife Pilar, okay? And then there's some other characters in there. I'm not going to get into all the character dynamics here. But he's got to blow a bridge. And he can't blow the bridge too early. He can't blow the bridge too late. This has to be a coordinated attack. He has to blow the bridge when this attack commences, right? That's the novel. And there's not a lot of action in it. It's a lot of dialogue, conversations, and wrestling with, I guess, like your moral code. I guess some people call this the Hemingway Code. There are, yeah. How do I go back talking about this? Okay, hold on a second. I told you this was going to be a mess because I don't know how to talk about this book. I'll just say this: the book is incredibly complex. I don't know if this is Hemingway trying to work through after the fact because the book's published in 1940. He was totally in on the propaganda side of supporting the Republican government, but the book itself does not depict anybody pure as the driven snow. The forces that we are supposed to be identifying with as the protagonist, there's a flashback sequence in the novel where we see Pablo and the Republican fighters, these partisans, slaughtering people that are supportive of the fascist or the nationalist party. Okay? These people are beat to death with flails and thrown off of a cliff. So it's actually kind of depicting the Reds, what was this called again? The Red Scare. See, I'm trying to get the history straight. The Red Terror. So it has a depiction of the Red Terror. This kind of messes up Pablo. We get kind of like these characters that are dealing with the idea of killing your fellow man, and there's some themes that are related to Christ. One of the interesting things I found about the book was this allusion to 3 days. Okay, because according to the Bible and the tradition of the church, Christ was in the tomb for 3 days and he rose on the third day. Well, this book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, they're going to build bomb a bridge. The bombing of the bridge and blowing it up takes place 3 days from now. So the whole book is chronicling 3 days. And then there's some talk about resurrection in the novel. There is no resurrection at the end of this novel, but at one point Pablo says that he wishes he could resurrect the fascist that he had killed. I found Pablo to be a very interesting character. His wife Pilar was very interesting. There is a lot of, I think this book is amazing, okay? But I'm wrestling with the character of Robert Jordan. My question is, and I cannot figure this out, is Robert Jordan the American expatriate who is fighting along with these guerrillas? Is he a hero? Is he not a hero? What was Hemingway's intention with this character? I'm left with a lot of questions that I don't have answers for. Okay, so Robert Jordan's character in the novel he's an existentialist. Okay? And one of the things, I'll get into the character briefly here. So I just want to say, is Robert Jordan a hero? That's my question to you. If you've read the book, please tell me. Do you think he's a hero? Because I don't believe he is a hero. In my worldview, my personal opinion, I don't believe that Robert Jordan is a hero. Because in chapter 26, Robert Jordan has an internal monologue. Now, a lot of Hemingway's works, from what I've read thus far, have been very minimalist. This book is not so. We get a lot of internal discussions where Robert Jordan, we see all of his thoughts. We get to see what he's thinking. Chapter 26, he has an internal monologue where he reveals that he's not a real Marxist. In fact, he says he believes in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He has a strong sense of individualism, and he questions the dialectical approach to things that the Marxists have taken. He has a strong sense of personal freedom, and he's convinced himself that at the conclusion of this war, he can discard the things that he doesn't believe in. So he's fighting for a cause that this is so crazy. He's fighting for a cause and aligned himself with a group that he doesn't believe in. And at the end of the book, I'm not going to tell you how the book ends. I will say, please don't read the back cover if you've never read this before, because the back cover will spoil it for you. But he says this, quote, "There is no one thing that's true. It's all true," unquote. This character is basically proclaiming existentialism, that truth is subjective. And this is a very Nietzschean concept, Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy, that there are no absolutes, that everyone has to create their own meaning in life. So Robert Jordan is trying to create meaning out of, I guess, non-meaning, come to grips with this tragic failure. Okay, because I will say this, the book does result in failure. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what that failure entails, whether it's him not blowing the bridge, or whether it's a failed mission, or if it's a failure of the war, or whatever. That's up to you to decide. But is trying to validate personal meaning and come up with a meaning in the absence of an absolute truth. You have to create your own truth. Use an example from Rocky, okay? I know a lot of people hate Rocky, but Rocky fighting Apollo Creed in the first Rocky movie, he has to determine for himself. He says, I cannot win. It's probably the best scene in the movie. So he has to create his own version of success where he says, if I can go the distance, if I can just last through the conclusion all the way to the end of the fight, then I'm a winner. That's kind of like existentialism. You have to create your own value, your own code. That's what Robert Jordan does here. However, this is the conflict that I have with the character. If you're fighting and aligning so you've aligned yourself with a cause that you don't really believe in, you're fighting for something that's not your truth. How is that heroic? Now, he's fighting for Maria, which is probably the most problematic aspect of the novel, because the romantic relationship that he has with this girl is kind of probably the most unrealistic aspect of the book, and I think it's the thing that people will latch onto and criticize. But overall, I think the novel is well worth your time. In fact, there's a Metallica song, For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is inspired by chapter 27 of the novel. Okay? For whom the bell tolls, time marches on, right? Cliff Burton, the bass guitarist, the original bass guitarist for the band, I guess he introduced this book to his fellow bandmates. They wrote a song inspired by the 27th chapter of the book. So if you want to know what that Metallica song is about, and you're a Metallica fan, you got to read the novel. So I don't know. You let me know. Do you think that Robert Jordan is a hero? Now I'm going to talk really quickly and conclude with the movie. Movie adaptation was from 1943. This is now in the public domain. If you want to watch this film, you can find it on YouTube. Several copies have been uploaded. Ernest Hemingway advocated to have Gary Cooper play Robert Jordan. That was who he had in mind. And he pushed to get Ingrid Bergman cast in the movie as Maria. All right? The finished product of the film, Hemingway was critical of. We don't get a lot of the internal dialogue and discussion that takes place in the novel and the movie. And I don't really know how I feel about the film. Okay? The film is... I don't know. I have my qualms with it. It does not capture kind of like the more interesting aspects of the book. I think it kind of portrays Robert Jordan as a straight up romantic hero. There was a lot of pushback and censorship due to the Hays Code. The Catholic Church was really involved in kind of censoring this movie. So all of the references to fascism have been removed. You'll simply hear the nationalist forces referred to as nationalist in the movie. A lot of the romantic stuff is really played down to fit in with the moral code. In fact, you'll never see really Gary Cooper's character, Robert Jordan, and Ingrid Bergman's character of Maria sleep with each other. All right? They are having, they are fornicating. Okay? They make love in the book, but it's implied in the movie. It's never actually seen on film. In fact, Gary Cooper never takes his jacket off, which is something that Ernest Hemingway criticized. So I don't think he was happy with the finished product. But it is what it is. So I don't know. This long, rambly talk that I've had, I'm wrestling with this book. Maybe that's the sign of a great novel. This is a recommend for me because it's not very often I come across a book that sparks this kind of like, I'm wrestling with it 2 days later. In fact, I'm having trouble picking up and reading anything else. I'm having what you might call a book hangover. This book is, I'm wrestling with it, okay? Because I don't understand how John McCain, Senator John McCain, and Barack Obama, people that are on opposite sides of the political spectrum, both like this novel. Both of them cite this as one of their favorite books. How does that even happen? I'm trying to wrap my head around this. And I don't think that reading the character of Robert Jordan as a hero is a correct reading of the text. In my personal opinion, I think that Robert Jordan is a fool. And I have pity on the character, and I think, how foolish to insert yourself into a situation that really doesn't have anything to do with you and fight this war for your own personal reasons and think that you can discard the ideology of the people that you're fighting with. Because there are no people in this book that are really good. The Republican Army and the Nationalist Army, right? They both do horrible, atrocious things. The Nationalists purge and execute people that are political rivals, and the Republicans do the same thing. So I can't identify with either side because I think that they both are morally gray, and in some instances just flat out evil. And that makes this book difficult to wrestle with. So that's all I got to say. Thanks for watching. And let me know what you think about this below in the comments section. Have a wonderful day.